Yes, finally. Abraham, who we all know, was told by the end of chapter 15 in Genesis that his descendants would destroy the people that lived in Canaan, and then that his descendants themselves would live in the land flowing with milk and honey. It was going to be his descendants' responsibility to destroy those people because of the evil things that they were doing, but he was also told that it wasn't time yet because their evil had not been fulfilled. I don't remember exactly how it's stated, but it wasn't time yet, and that would happen in 400 years. The ones you see in the red circle are pretty much the ones that he went in and were to destroy when they got there. But you'll also notice that there is another land there along the coast called Philistia, where the Philistines lived, and that was not listed in Genesis chapter 15. The Philistines were important in the Old Testament. We know quite a bit about them. We don't know exactly where they came from. Historically, there's a lot of things we don't know about them, but from the Bible, we know quite a bit. For instance, any student of the Bible that's read much of it at all or studied it or been in Bible classes will know about the battle between David and Goliath, the manipulation of Samson by Delilah, the King Saul's final battle, and the capture of the Ark of the Covenant, all involved the Philistines. Although these two groups, Israel and the Philistines, were often locked in battle, in combat, in some kind of confrontation, the Philistines never actually launched a full-scale invasion of Israel or attempted to in any way. We don't know a lot about their origins, but we know a fair amount about the 5 cities that were their major cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron. Philistia's location was along, as we saw on the map just a second ago, let's go back there, was along the Mediterranean coast. And there was a coastal highway that ran north to south there that was important, and that gave it a strategic value in ancient times. And according to 1 Samuel chapter 13, the Philistines had also had the ability to manufacture iron. In fact, they had quite a monopoly on that, and that made them rather important. These two things made that land important not just to the Philistines themselves, but to nations around them that kind of help protect them a lot of times. As with all of the other Old Testament predictions, we have discussed so far that the prophets said about different nations and cities. There were 2 reasons for their condemnation. Again, one more time, what are the 2 main reasons that God's prophets give for condemnation? We mentioned this specifically 2 weeks ago to make sure we brought it out.
Bad religion.
What's that?
They're bad religion, but also
Evil and bad religion. They were evil nations. They did bad things to other people in places, and their religion was bad. The second one, somebody else besides Terry. I don't like one student answering everything else. You remember that, don't you? I put a stop to it, didn't I? She was one of them, like to answer all the questions. You know?
I don't know if I know, but I just say worshiping idols.
Well, that's part of what Terry had said, okay? That goes along with that. Nope. How they treated the Israelites, okay? That one crops up every time also. So, what we see are these 2 things. For instance, in Amos chapter 1, verse 6, for for 3 sins of Gaza, even 4, I will not relent, because she took capture whole communities and sold them to Edom. What was it? What was her major sin, other than worshiping the wrong gods? Slave trade. That this city was big into slave trade. And then Ezekiel chapter 25 says, the sovereign Lord, because the Lord says, because the Philistines acted in vengeance and took revenge with malice, with their hearts, and with ancient hostility, sought to destroy who? Judah. Okay? Israel. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord has to say. I am about to stretch out my hand against the Philistines. They did evil continually, and they persecuted God's people, just like all the other nations did that were condemned, that we've talked about so far. Because of these reasons, the Old Testament prophets made 2 kinds of predictions about Philistia. One was predictions about the 5 major cities, and the other was predictions regarding the disappearance of the nation of Philistia itself altogether. Gaza was the strongest of the 5 cities. Egypt actually used it as an administrative center for its interests in the region, and as a buffer between Egypt itself and the warlike nations of the north. So they had maybe a military presence there sometimes. I'm not positive. Nobody said that actually for sure, but somehow or another, it was a buffer city. Okay, they used it for several different things. Gaza also protected the caravans that moved from north to south, and that along the Mediterranean Sea there, that kind of that green line with the green dots, that's the trade route. If you went too far inland, you'd of course start to get to the mountains, and that wasn't as easy to travel. So it was right along the Mediterranean Sea where the cities grew up. Gaza and some of the other cities in Philistia were there. Tyre and Sidon, like we've already talked about, were there. And that was the easiest way and the way that everybody traveled. And Gaza was the first defense as you came out, one of the first defenses as you came out of Egypt. Isaiah calls Gaza the way of the sea. And as we have already said, it was the center of slave trade in the region. Now think about this. Not far from, and I wish I had a pointer to point to you, if you go to Gaza down there at the bottom and you go straight to the right, and then you go up just a little bit, there would be the city of Hebron. Okay? Guess where Jacob lived? Hebron. So, what happened to one of Jacob's sons? Sold into slavery. Guess where it's likely, since he ended up in Egypt, where he went through? The Bible doesn't tell us this, but it's more than likely that he went through Gaza during that process because of what they were known for. Despite its importance, Amos in chapter 1 says that Gaza is going to burn. Jeremiah said that it will become bald like a shaven head, and Zephaniah says that it would become abandoned. When Alexander the Great came knocking in the 4th century BC, Gaza, just like Tyre, we talked about Tyre, defiantly refused entry. Because of what he had gone through while capturing Tyre, if you remember, they all went to the island. He had to tear the whole city down, throw it into the water, and march his army across the causeway to try to get there. It was a long... He wasn't real happy when he got to Gaza and they were trying to pull the same stunt. There was intense fighting that went on for 2 months. Twice, Alexander the Great himself was wounded in battle. And therefore, after taking the city, he was not satisfied with a mere capture. So guess what he did? He burned it, just like it was predicted. Sometime after this, a new city was built on the spot, and Antiochus torched the city also when he tried to come. Again, the city was built. The book of Maccabees, which is some of the books that are historical in between the two testaments, starting between 400 BC and when Jesus came. One of the Maccabees books, First Maccabees, says, then Jonathan, who is Jonathan Maccabees, set out, went to Gaza, but the people of Gaza shut him out. So he besieged it and burned its suburbs with fire and plundered the city. This cycle continued throughout the Jewish rebellion and during the Arabic civil wars, and even centuries later during the Crusades. Every time the city was conquered, it was burned. Over the centuries, many scholars have grappled with Jeremiah's prophecy that Gaza would be like a shaven head or a bald head. Some have thought that this is merely symbolic, until an explorer named Alexander Keith went there in the 1800s, sometime in the middle to just later than the middle of the 1800s. I don't remember the exact date. He attempted to find lodging in one of the ancient cities that he wanted to stay in, but when he got there, there was sickness in the village, so he decided he was going to go out and look for a place that he could put the tents up and spend a few nights, or spend at least a night. So he went out not too far from one of the nearby cities, put his tent down on a dune that was nice and smooth, and lo and behold, he accidentally stumbled on the remains of an ancient city hidden under the sand. Keith had discovered ancient Gaza. It had been covered with sand for centuries, and its location simply looked like the top of a bald head. Today, the Gaza Strip that we hear about in the news is different than the ancient city of Gaza. It's in the same place as the Philistines were, roughly, okay, up against the Mediterranean Sea. But when they say Gaza, they don't really mean the city of ancient Gaza, all right? I think there might be even a modern city of Gaza, but it's not in the same place. I don't remember that for sure. In fact, I scoured the internet for photos of archaeological digs of the ancient city, and I didn't find much at all. The greatest of the Philistine cities, which is Gaza, is now only a series of sandhills. It is so forsaken that there is not a single hut resting on the site. And some say it's so bald that there's not so much as a pillar or a standing stone that marks the spot. And one source went so far to say that there's not even a single blade of grass in the area. The prophets made many other predictions about the other four major cities in ancient Philistia, the ones that we listed just previously. We're not going to go into all of them, but each one of those were very specific to those individual cities, and each prediction has, over the centuries, come true. Each one is verifiable. But the Old Testament prophets also made predictions about Philistia, the nation in general. Jeremiah says that the Lord is about to destroy all of the Philistines. Zephaniah says that none will be left, and Zechariah says that the Philistines will go the way of the Jebusites. And there are no Jebusites today, so obviously he means there's not going to be any Philistines in the future also. Each prediction made about the nation of Philistia have come true. In 1931, a man named George Davis wrote this: "The Philistines have been destroyed so completely that there is not a single Philistine living anywhere in the world today." More modern archaeologist named Neil Berling, he says both Jew and Philistine adapted to the local Canaanite culture. Okay, he's comparing the Jewish nation to the Philistine nation because they think that the Philistines actually got there later than a lot of these others like the Amorites and the Jebusites, etc. And then Israel also migrated there themselves, so that's what he's talking about. But when both peoples went into captivity, which each one did individually, the Philistines left the stage of the Near Eastern history and disappeared. The Israelites didn't. The complete disappearance of the Philistine nation is sometimes called an enigma by modern scholars as they study this powerful and innovative people that failed to survive. In 1992, Seymour Gittin, in his book, The Last Days of the Philistines, wrote in reference to the ancient textual evidence written about the Philistine destruction by the Babylonians. So they're looking at the old writings from the time and shortly afterwards that talk about when the Babylonians came in and fought against the Philistines. And this is what he says: "It does not explain its disastrous finality. It does not explain why the Philistines, who had endured previous Egyptian, Judean, and Assyrian conquests, did not survive the Babylonian conquest." The simple answer, of course, is God predicted it that way. All right? The evidence seems to point in that direction. But, unfortunately, for many skeptics, what's the reason why they can't accept that as an answer and they still scratch their heads?
They don't believe in prediction.
They're the same as George Wald, okay? They refuse to believe in the supernatural, so they try to find another explanation. Absolutely. The Old Testament prophets speak of other nations and make predictions about God's judgments. Next, we're going to talk about the Moabites and the Amorites. So, let's mention Ammon first, and we're just going to mention her real quick. Ezekiel 25 says that foreigners from the east will possess the land. Jeremiah 49 says that it will be destroyed. Ezekiel 25 says that Ammon will become a pasture for camels and a resting place for sheep. And Ezekiel chapter 25 says Ammon will cease to exist as a nation and a people. Have you ever, I remember wondering this for decades and decades till I started studying a little bit of Old Testament predictions. Have you ever wondered why so much of that area is nothing but flat desert? I mean, look at all the nations in the area we've talked about, all right? God made that place that way, all right? Most people won't necessarily believe that, but I think it's true. I think the evidence is there. Just like all the nations we have studied over the past several weeks, all of these predictions, again, came true. In real-time history, verifiable. This is the major part of what's left of Ammon today. That's about it. Moab was also mentioned. In Jeremiah, it says that the Moabite cities will be laid waste, her towns will become desolate, with no one to live in them. Isaiah says that Moab's production of wine will cease. Jeremiah says that others will control Moab's agricultural riches. Jeremiah, flocks rather than people will live in the ruins of that city. And Jeremiah 48 says Moab will be destroyed as a nation and become because it defied the Lord. Again, the predictions all came true. This is a dig in recent times found in of the area. This is an ancient Moabite sanctuary. In this sanctuary, they found this rather interesting. It is the first known reference, ancient reference, that uses the word Hebrews. Okay, the Hebrew people. The inscription also offers insight into the bloody aftermath of the conquest of Atarat, which is described both in the mesostele that we talked about a long time ago and in the Bible in 2 Kings chapter 3. After the death of King Ahab of Israel, and this is in the mid-800s BC, mid-800s BC, King Mesa of Moab rebelled against the Israelite domination, but they were defeated. Over the next few centuries, little by little, Moab began to disappear. Nebuchadnezzar marched against Moab in 582 BC. Some were carried at that time, just like the Israelites were by the Babylonians, carried into exile, while others fled to Egypt. Scattered references are made to Moab over the next couple of centuries until they finally, little by little, were gone. So, we've covered quite a number of cities so far in nations. This last one I'm going to do today is going to be kind of a lead-in to what we're going to do next week, and next week's it's going to be basically the last prediction that we're going to talk about. Next, we're going to talk about Sidon here, and other things about Tyre and Sidon that I think lead into something that I want to talk about next week. And then the week after that, we're going to have a quiz. It'll be an easy one, kind of to sum up, and then we're going to go to another topic. So we're getting close to being done with what I'm going to talk about here. Last week, which nation did we discuss? Actually, a city. Do you remember? Tyre. Okay? There was a lot of things spoken about Tyre. This week, we're going to talk about Sidon. According to the Old Testament prophet Ezekiel, Sidon would also receive judgment for its actions. Now, if we look up to the two arrows at the top, two red arrows, the bottom one is Tyre and the top one is Sidon. These two nations were close. They were only about 25 miles apart, and they had a lot of similarities. You remember that Jesus came from Galilee, which is the pink area, and went one time as far as Tyre. All right, so he was up in that area at one point. That was probably the farthest north that Jesus traveled in his lifetime. These two cities, Tyre and Sidon, were rivals. Sidon made the claim that they were, remember we said that Tyre claimed that it was the oldest city ever in existence? All right? Sidon says, we're 100 years older than you are. So it was like their rivalry. They fought back and forth about who was the oldest. They had comparable fortifications. They had both had a large fleet of ships. They both housed a large merchant population due to similar locations. So they had a lot of trade going on. Tyre was known as being the richest, but Sidon was similar in that nature. Both gained fame because of their artisans and their craftsmen. And because of their similarities, it might seem that these two would receive the same fates when God spoke his judgments against him. But that's not true. Ezekiel says this, I am against you, Sidon, and among you I will display my glory. You will know that I am the Lord when I inflict punishment on you, and within you am proved to be holy. I will send a plague upon you and make blood flow in your streets. The slain will fall within you with the sword against you on every side. Then you will know that I am the Lord. God's punishment of Sidon has been harsh if you look at its history. But Ezekiel never said anything about a total destruction or the idea that Sidon would vanish like he did other nations. In fact, in this case, it was the smaller and weaker of many of the cities that we talked about. I mean, look at Babylon, look at Assyria, look at a lot of the other ones. It was even smaller and weaker than Tyre itself. It wasn't as large. Yet, it did not and was not predicted to totally disappear or to totally decline. This is a photo of Sidon today. It's actually quite a metropolis. It's known for its citrus and banana groves. It has quite a bit of commerce there. But what else is Sidon known for? And think about the area that it's in. You see it on the news over the last 30 years quite a little bit.
Today, isn't it?
It's in Lebanon, yep. And it's also part of the home base, at least at part of the time, of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. A very ruthless and they fight a lot of causes in that area, cause a lot of bloodshed. In fact, a significant battle was fought in Sidon as late as 1991. This battle between the PLO and the Lebanese government was called the Battle of Sidon. It was called the final battle of the Lebanese Civil War. It may have been the latest battle, but it is not the only battle that's ever been fought in that city. Ezekiel says this, "This is what the sovereign Lord says, I am against you, O Sidon. I will send a plague upon her and make blood flow in her streets. The slain will fall within her with the sword against her in every side." This happened to Sidon originally, and it has happened to Sidon countless times, even up to modern times, over and over and over again. This prophecy did not begin with the numerous modern battles that we've seen that are done in the streets of Sidon today. The Babylonians were the first. Then came the Persians. The Persians fought many unsuccessful battles, but bloodied the streets every time of that same place. Another, for instance, in 351 BC, Sidon revolted against the Persians. This time the Persian army brought 300,000 soldiers. This is a small city. 300,000 soldiers back at that time was a lot. It was like way, way bigger than most cities, all right? So he had like an alliance of some kind or another to bring against them. When the citizens of Sidon saw that the battle could not be won, a few tried to surrender. But the Persian troops were so upset they cruelly butchered all of them. That's when the king of Sidon at the time, named Tennis, betrayed his own people. First of all, he burnt all of their ships so that they couldn't go and escape. Why? I don't know if they're sure. I never did find out a reason. The most devastating part of that battle was that in despair, many of the people shut themselves inside their houses. They didn't have any place else to go, and then they set their own houses on fire. They say that 40,000 of Sidon's people were burnt to death that day. Confrontation after confrontation followed. The Ptolemies, the Seleucids, the Romans, the Muslims, the Crusades, all fought bloody battles in the streets of Sidon. But every time, the Sidon built itself back up. So we got to the point where we see this today. It never was totally destroyed. But then again, God didn't predict that that would happen. Hamilton, in his commentary, describes the conflict between Sidon and the Crusaders that came much later. In the days of the Crusades, Sidon was taken and retaken again by opposing forces. 3 times it was captured by Crusaders, and 3 times it fell before the Muslim armies. But unlike Tyre, Sidon rebounded after each and every blow. Even in the 1840s, there's a famous battle that combined the forces of the English and the French and Turkey, and I think maybe a couple other countries, and they shelled Sidon from the sea. And in the 20th century, there have been civil war after civil war in the streets. The Drosses, the Turks, the Arabs, the Christians, the Israelis, the Muslims, all have fought for possession of Sidon. Sidon has possibly had the most bloodiest history of any known city. Just like Ezekiel said would happen. These photos show what's left of her temple today. It is known as being a tourist attraction, just like many of the other ancient civilizations that we've talked about have things that people come and see. But it's also important that Tyre and Sidon are mentioned in another context in the Bible. Jesus spent a lot of time teaching and preaching and doing miracles in Galilee. At times, great crowds followed him around the Sea of Galilee. And we've studied that in fairly recently in Nathan's class on Wednesday night and other gospel classes that we've had here over the years. And at least one occasion we said that Jesus walked as far north as Tyre, which would have been about 35 miles from Jesus' home base of Capernaum at the time. But Jesus says in Luke chapter 10 and Matthew chapter 11, and I've kind of mixed these together to get all the points, he said the following: "Woe unto you, Chorazin! Woe unto you, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago, sitting in sackcloth and ashes. And woe unto you, Capernaum! Will you be exalted to heaven? No, you will be brought down to Hades. For if the mighty works have been done to you, mighty works done in you had been done in Sodom, you would have remained until this day. Capernaum, you shall be brought down to Hades. For if the mighty works have been done that were done in you had been done in Sodom, they would have remained until this day also. But it shall be more tolerable in the day of judgment for Tyre and Sidon than for you." What do you know about those cities? Okay, and as you look on this map, you'll see the map of Palestine on the left. You'll see a couple of things that are circled there that tell you where some of the most important cities are. And then you see the insert on the right, and then underlined are the 3 cities that Jesus is talking about. And then on the left, just north, you should know by now where Tyre and Sidon is. I think this map shows Tyre. Does it show Sidon also? I can't, I've got my glasses on. Okay, so you can see they were fairly close to each other. Jesus stayed in Capernaum after he was kicked out of Nazareth, quite a little bit. And he preached in that whole area a lot. Did miracles in that whole area a lot. We already know the punishment that was given to a lot of ancient cities. Jesus, in this particular case, picks out 3. Sodom, which we're all familiar with, what happened to it back in Genesis. And then we just got done talking last week and this week about Sidon. And yet, as mad as he was for them, he says it's going to be worse off for these 3 Jewish cities. Think about that for a minute and let it sink in. These were people that were supposedly following the true God. And yet it's going to be worse for them than it is for Tyre and Sidon. And Sodom, who was totally wiped off the map. We know that Jesus did miracles in this place, in Galilee, and specifically in these cities. For instance, the centurion servant in Matthew chapter 8, the man sick with palsy in Mark chapter 2, the nobleman's son in John chapter 4. There were lots and lots of these miracles that everybody saw and heard about at the time. Jesus also taught a lot in the region around these cities. Yet notice what Jesus says about them. These cities had Jesus himself, the Son of God, the one they were looking for, preaching and doing miracles in them. Miracles that everyone witnessed, and yet he condemns these Jewish cities, the ones that he condemned others for persecuting, more than the pagan cities of Tyre and Sidon and Sodom. Cities which God's prophets announced harsh judgments on, and which God destroyed. What's the reason? The answer is found in the rest of this passage. Jesus had just sent some of his followers out to teach. He warned them that many people would not want to listen to what they had to say. Jesus tells them in Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 16, "He who hears you hears me, and he who rejects you rejects me, and he who rejects me rejects the one that sent me." So if they're not listening to what you're saying what I'm saying what God's saying, they're rejecting God. He is saying that the people who heed the words of Jesus, even when spoken by other men, are actually heeding the words of God himself, if we look at it backwards. Therefore, if they do not listen to men sent by Jesus, then they are ultimately rejecting God. We have already seen what God does to Old Testament cities and nations who do not listen to him and persecute the people, persecute his people. Now, these Jewish cities that are supposedly looking for the long-awaited Messiah, were in turn rejecting God's words themselves, even though they had God's Son standing right in front of them. Does that remind you a little bit of lip service? They would still go down to the feast. They would still go to the synagogue. They would still supposedly do all the things that a good religious Jewish person would do. And look at how they're being condemned. Therefore, it is important to remember that as bad as Tyre and Sidon and all these other cities and nations that we have discussed were, and as bad as the judgments against them were, God tells these Jewish cities that They were going to have it worse because they actually had met the one and only theme of the entirety of God's writing, had heard him speak, had seen his miracles, and yet they rejected him and would eventually yell the words, "Crucify him." We need to see the connection here and how serious it was when Jesus made those statements. All of these ancient nations and cities that we talked about disobeyed God's word and persecuted his people, and they were punished. But it would be God's chosen, the Jewish nation, that ultimately rejected God and therefore would get the worst condemnation of all. And therefore, it would be the predictions that we're going to talk about next week that Jesus makes against the city of Jerusalem and their fulfillment that are going to be the most punitive. We're not going to get into all the details of what those chapters say. We are simply going to talk about what Jesus says the city, what would happen in the city, and then look at sources as to what actually happened historically, just like we did for the other cities. And that will be the last class on this, other than your test the next week. Any questions or comments?
I know something came up on Facebook this week about the Philistines. I think there was some, I probably already read through it, but I think November 6th of 2022, there was a big article that came out about the Philistines with a lot of the same stuff, trying to track where they may have come from, maybe out of Egypt, and here and there. So I started reading through it, but it was a whole bunch of those.
Some say they may have come from Greece. They just kind of pop up. They don't know. We know a lot about them from Bible and things once they were there, but they're not really sure where exactly they came from originally. I don't know why they don't know, but they don't. Maybe because they've never actually explored the ancient city of Gaza because it's like a bald head. You know, a lot of that never gets done because either there's not interest or there's not funding, or a particular area like, I'm trying to remember different ones that nations and governments fight over who can get in there and do the research. And so a lot of that stuff never gets done to the extent that you might think it would because of politics.
I also turned on one of the news stations locally just to see what the roads looked like this morning, and they were talking about another discovery in Saqqara that is supposed to be the oldest. It's a person 1,000 years older than King Tut, and they just found his mummy, and now they're getting deeply.
I didn't read that, but I think I saw that they found something real ancient in Egypt, yeah.
And it was not plundered. Right. You know,
Yeah.
it had not been plundered, and so there's a whole bunch of real good things coming out of it.
If Sarah Parkak is right, we talked about her briefly. I've read quite a bit about her. If she's right in what she's seen in the infrared images, then Egypt is packed with more of this kind of stuff than we can even imagine. And it probably can never be all discovered because there's just going to be so much of it.
I think you kind of alluded to that in the report, too, the same thing, that they feel there's still lots there.
Yep.
Also, since we've got satellite photography that's much more precise now than it used to be, they found in the Egypt and Libya area that they found all kinds of straight lines and like corners of buildings out there
In Egypt?
where there's nothing today.
No, that's what I showed you a picture of that.
Yeah, but
Okay.
nobody's had time to explain.
No, it's vast.
There's just too many of them.
It's vast. The only one I showed you was one area. I can't remember the name of it. That was huge. And I showed you a picture of what it looks like from the ground and then a picture of what it looks like from that infrared photography. And what I told you was, and I couldn't find this part, I seen a presentation by Parkak one time where they showed the original, then they showed what she saw from the satellites with all the squares and stuff like you said, and then they turned it on its side and they raised it up and showed in a computer graphic, what they think that area looked like. And it just looks like a sand desert now. It was amazing. I've been looking for that forever and I can't find it again. Absolutely. Anything else? All right.